It was a quiet, humid morning deep in the Florida Everglades. The sky hung low and gray, the air thick with the scent of mud and wet leaves. Ranger Mason Cole was sipping coffee from a dented metal thermos inside his patrol truck when the radio crackled sharply to life. All units near the South Loop Trail. We've got a report of a python wrapped around a dog. Unknown condition. Hiker on scene. Coordinates incoming. Mason's heart skipped. He slammed the thermos down and threw the truck into gear. Dispatch, this is Cole. I'm 10 minutes out and en route. He tore down the narrow dirt road. Leaves and branches brushed against the sides of his truck. The South Loop Trail was remote and hard to access, a known hotspot for pythons, which had grown increasingly aggressive in recent years. Most encounters involved wild hogs or raccoons, but a dog. By the time Mason reached the trailhead, another truck was pulling up behind him. It was Tasha Reed, one of the newer rangers, but sharp and calm under pressure. They exchanged a quick nod before a frantic voice pulled their attention. A man in hiking boots and a torn shirt came running toward them, breathless. "It's down there," he gasped. "It's bad. I saw it through the brush. The dog's still alive, but barely." "Take us," Mason said. Tasha grabbed her pole tool from the back, and they followed the man into the thick brush, moving quickly but carefully. Roughly 200 yards into the trail, the hiker pointed with a shaky hand. There, nestled near a muddy ravine, partially hidden by tall sawgrass, was a scene that made both rangers freeze. A large python, easily over 15 feet long, was wrapped tightly around a medium-sized black dog. The snake's thick coils were pressed against the animal's ribs and lower body, its massive head resting low near the ground. The dog's fur was matted with mud, and its eyes flicked wildly from side to side. It was still conscious but barely. Tasha's breath caught. "That thing's huge. We've got to act fast," Mason said. "Startle ahead. Don't let it lunge." Tasha nodded, stepping sideways with her tool extended. She moved in front of the python, tapping the ground to get its attention. The snake reacted slowly, raising its head a few inches and tightening its grip in response. Mason crouched down low from the side. He moved cautiously, positioning himself just inches away from the outer coil. He could feel the heat radiating from the python's body. The dog let out a soft, broken whimper. It was a sound that shook them both. "Hold it steady," Mason whispered Dot in one swift move. He grabbed part of the python's body and tried to wedge his arm between the coils. The python recoiled slightly, twisting toward him, but Tasha stepped in fast, distracting it again with the pole. Mason gritted his teeth and continued working. The coils were like steel, and the snake wasn't giving up. The dog's breathing had slowed. Mason could feel it slipping. "I've got to unroll it," he said through clenched teeth, one coil at a time. Just then, another ranger, Kyle, arrived from the backup call. Without needing instruction, he jumped in to assist, grabbing the python's tail end. Together, the three rangers began prying, inch by inch. One coil loosened, then another. The dog suddenly gave a weak kick. It was still fighting. That tiny movement was enough to energize them. With one final yank, Mason pulled the last coil off and fell back into the grass. The heavy python now secured by Kyle and Tasha. The dog lay motionless. Mason crawled toward it, mud coating his arms. He placed his hand gently on the dog's neck. "I've got a pulse," he said breathlessly. "It's alive." The rangers didn't cheer. Not yet. They knew survival wasn't guaranteed, but for the moment, they'd won, and none of them could have guessed what the dog would do next. The moment Mason confirmed the dog had a pulse, something shifted in the air. Relief swept through the group, but tension still gripped their shoulders. The python, now subdued but still writhing slowly in Kyle's arms, was a powerful reminder that danger hadn't passed completely. Tasha took a deep breath and knelt beside the dog. "He's breathing, but shallow," she said. "We need to move fast." Mason nodded. "We're not far from the ranger station. Let's carry him out and radio for the vet to meet us there." Gently, Mason slid his arms under the dog's limp body. It was lighter than expected, too thin for its size. The python had clearly drained much of its strength. As Mason stood with the dog cradled in his arms, the animal shifted slightly, letting out a weak sigh. Its head rolled toward Mason's chest and rested there as if it somehow knew it was finally safe. The team started moving. Kyle stayed behind to monitor the python, now secured and awaiting wildlife relocation officers. Mason and Tasha walked swiftly through the brush, Mason carefully balancing the injured animal. The dog didn't resist. It didn't whimper or panic. Instead, it leaned into Mason's arms as though it recognized him, like it had decided, in that moment, that it trusted him completely. "Think it's a stray?" Tasha asked softly as they walked. "Maybe," Mason replied. "Could be lost. Might have been out here for days." The hike back to the truck felt longer than before. Mud clung to their boots, and sweat ran down their necks, but neither of them slowed down. When they reached the lot, Mason laid the dog gently across a clean tarp in the back of his truck. Tasha offered a bowl of water, and the dog, though still weak, managed to lick at it slowly. "I don't get it," she said. "Why didn't it try to run or panic when you picked it up? Most dogs would, especially after something like that." Mason shrugged but kept watching the dog. "I don't know. Maybe he knew we were helping." Before they could speculate more, the vet arrived. Dr. Lena Howard was a seasoned field vet who had seen everything from alligator bites to panther attacks. She climbed out of her jeep, pulled on gloves, and moved straight to the dog. "Let's see what we're dealing with," she murmured as she examined the animal. The dog shifted again, this time lifting its head slowly. It looked around at the small crowd, then turned its eyes directly toward Mason. There was something steady in that gaze, something calm but unexplainable. The connection was instant and clear to everyone standing nearby. "This dog's pretty beat up," Dr. Howard said, checking its limbs. "Some bruised ribs, minor lacerations, dehydration, maybe mild shock, but he's a survivor. No broken bones. With some care, he'll pull through." Mason exhaled in relief. Dr. Howard gave the dog some fluids and pain medication, then gently lifted him into a kennel in her van. As she prepared to leave, she turned to Mason. "You know," she said, "I've seen hundreds of rescue cases, but I've rarely seen a dog that calm after a python attack, and never one that attached itself to a person so fast. He didn't even growl." Mason looked at the dog, now resting but still watching him through the kennel door. "Yeah, there's something about him. He didn't fight me. He just let go." Tasha tilted her head. "It's like he was waiting for you." Dr. Howard smiled. "Well, he'll be at the Wildlife Recovery Center for a few days. You're welcome to visit." Mason didn't hesitate. "I will." As the vet's van pulled away down the dirt road, the sun began to break through the clouds above. Light spilled across the swamp trees, and the chirping of birds returned. The crisis had passed, but something deeper had just begun, because even as the python lay coiled in a containment crate and the dog headed toward safety, no one could stop thinking about the way it had looked at Mason. Not with fear, not with panic, but with recognition. And it wouldn't be the last time they saw each other. The next morning at the Everglades Wildlife Recovery Center, Dr. Lena Howard walked down the quiet corridor with a clipboard in hand. She stopped outside Kennel 7, where the black dog lay curled on a soft blanket, watching her with the same calm, intelligent eyes. He was stronger today, his breathing steady, his body no longer trembling, but he hadn't eaten much. And there was one strange thing. Every time someone walked by, he barely moved. But the moment Mason entered the room, the dog perked up, lifted his head, and even wagged his tail. By mid-morning, Mason showed up again, this time carrying a small bag of food and a folded blanket from his truck. He knocked gently on the kennel gate. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. The dog stood and slowly made his way to the door. He pressed his nose against the bars, tail wagging gently, eyes locked on Mason like he was the only person in the world that mattered. Dr. Howard, observing from the hallway, raised her eyebrows. "You two might as well have known each other for years." Mason smiled but didn't look away from the dog. "I feel like I have." He sat on the floor, opened the gate, and let the dog walk into his lap. The dog didn't hesitate. He leaned into Mason's chest again, just like he had in the swamp. That same quiet trust was there, as if nothing could shake it. Dr. Howard watched in silence for a moment, then cleared her throat. "We scanned him earlier for a microchip. No ID, no collar either, but I think he had a home once he's well behaved, and definitely socialized." Mason nodded. "Could he have gotten lost?" "Possibly," she said, "or abandoned. Either way, he survived something that should have ended very differently." Later that afternoon, Tasha stopped by the center. She peeked into the kennel and was stunned to see the dog not only eating from Mason's hand, but laying his head across his arm while doing it. "Okay, I'm officially impressed," she said, walking in. "Has he been like that all day?" Dr. Howard nodded. "Only with him." Tasha knelt beside the dog and ran her hand gently along his back. What if this guy has a family out there? Should we put out a notice or post his photo online? I already did, Dr. Howard replied. I notified the local shelters and posted in the Missing Pets network. No responses yet. As Mason scratched the dog gently behind the ears, he said, we should give him a name, just until we know for sure. Tasha smirked. How about Lucky? Dr. Howard chuckled. Considering what he survived, that fits. Mason looked down at the dog, who wagged his tail again, as if approving the choice. All right, Lucky it is. Over the next 2 days, Mason visited morning and evening. Lucky's condition improved rapidly faster than anyone expected. He was eating full meals, walking steadily, and responding well to commands. But the bond between him and Mason only grew stronger. It wasn't just the way Lucky followed Mason around the recovery yard. It was how he watched every move, sat beside him like a shadow, and even barked once when someone else got too close. It was as if he had chosen Mason, and everyone else was simply background noise. On the third morning, when Mason arrived, Lucky leaped up before the door even opened. Dr. Howard met Mason at the entrance with news. We got a call, she said. A woman from Naples saw the online post and thinks Lucky might be her missing dog. She's driving here today. Mason's heart sank a little, though he couldn't explain why. He looked down at Lucky, who was still staring up at him, oblivious to the news. If it's him, Mason said, he should go home. Dr. Howard nodded slowly. Yes, but if it's not, well, we might need to talk about something else. Mason crouched down and patted Lucky's back. Let's see what happens, boy. But deep down, part of him hoped that maybe the dog with the quiet eyes and unshakable trust wasn't going anywhere. Later that afternoon, the front parking lot of the Everglades Wildlife Recovery Center buzzed with quiet anticipation. A silver SUV pulled into the driveway and rolled to a gentle stop. A woman stepped out, holding a worn photo and a hopeful expression. Her name was Teresa Langley, and she had driven nearly 3 hours after seeing a blurry online image of a black dog that looked eerily similar to her missing pet. As she walked up the steps, Dr. Howard met her at the door. Mason stood nearby, his heart unexpectedly tight. Lucky, now resting comfortably in his kennel, had no idea that someone might be coming to claim him. I appreciate you driving all this way, Dr. Howard said warmly. Do you have the picture? Teresa handed over a photo of a black Labrador mixed with a white mark on his front paw. His name's Shadow. We lost him during a family camping trip over a month ago. He got spooked by fireworks and ran into the woods. We searched for days. We didn't think we'd ever see him again. Dr. Howard studied the picture and nodded. That does look a lot like him. He's inside. Would you like to meet him? Teresa gave a hopeful nod. Mason stood back, watching, silently preparing himself. A part of him knew this was the right thing if Lucky was truly someone's missing family member. Then this was the reunion he deserved. Still, it didn't stop the sting rising in his chest. They walked down the corridor slowly. At the end of the hallway, Lucky sat in his kennel, ears perked up, already sensing new visitors. He looked past Dr. Howard and locked eyes with Mason first. His tail began to thump against the blanket. Lucky, Mason whispered, kneeling beside the gate. We've got a visitor. Teresa stepped forward, her voice trembling. Shadow, is that you? The dog tilted his head. It's me, she said softly. It's Mum. The room held its breath. Lucky stood up and took one cautious step forward. Teresa held out her hand, crouching low. The dog sniffed the air but didn't move closer. Instead, he turned his head to Mason, tail wagging slightly faster. It's okay, Mason encouraged gently. Go see. Lucky stepped out of the kennel, took a few steps toward Teresa, sniffed her hand and, then, politely, backed away. His body remained calm, non-aggressive. But there was no tail wag, no jumping, no excitement. Just stillness. Dr. Howard glanced at Teresa. He seems calm, but not like he recognizes you. Tears welled up in Teresa's eyes. I thought maybe I just wanted it to be him. Mason knelt down beside Lucky and ran a hand over his back. The dog leaned into the touch without hesitation. He's bonded with you, Teresa said quietly. That's clear as day. Dr. Howard offered a gentle nod. Sometimes dogs form strong emotional attachments after trauma. He must associate Mason with safety, with survival. Teresa looked at the photo again, then back at the dog. This isn't Shadow. He's close, but Shadow had a scar above his left eye from when he was a puppy. This one doesn't. The truth settled into the room like a quiet breeze. Mason felt relief mixed with disbelief. He looked at Lucky, still calm, still focused only on him, and finally smiled. "I guess you're sticking around a bit longer," he said. Teresa stood and wiped her eyes. "I'm glad he's okay. Even if he's not mine, I'm grateful someone like you found him." She gave Lucky one last kind look before heading back toward the exit. Dr. Howard walked her out, leaving Mason alone with the dog. "Well, Lucky," Mason said, as the dog sat beside him, "looks like it's just us again." Lucky wagged his tail and gave a short, soft bark, almost as if he understood, and that moment, quiet, simple, powerful, was when Mason knew this dog wasn't just a rescue. He was something more, a partner, a friend, a survivor with a story that wasn't quite finished yet. The days following Teresa's visit brought a strange calm to the recovery center. With the mystery of Lucky's identity still unresolved, Mason visited more frequently, partly out of routine, but mostly because he couldn't stay away, and Lucky seemed to sense that. Every time Mason stepped into the building, Lucky would rise to his feet, tail wagging steadily, eyes locked on him like he was the only person who mattered. Dr. Howard had taken notice. One morning, as Mason entered Lucky's kennel with a leash in hand, she leaned on the doorway and said, "He's made up his mind about you." Mason chuckled softly. "I think he did that the moment we pulled him out of that python's grip." She crossed her arms. "You know, this level of attachment, it's rare, and I've seen a lot of dogs. Whatever trauma he went through out there, it's like he decided you were the only one he could trust." Mason clipped on the leash. "Maybe I was just in the right place at the right time." Dr. Howard smiled. "Or maybe he's the one who chose." Later that day, Mason took Lucky out for a walk around the center's outer trail. The dog moved slowly at first, but soon picked up a steady pace. His muscles had healed faster than expected, and his energy had returned. But there was something more, something unusual. Every time they passed a certain corner of the trail where the cypress trees grew thick and low, Lucky would stop abruptly. He'd stare into the trees, ears raised, body tense. "Hey, what's out there?" Mason asked, kneeling beside him. Lucky didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stood motionless, fixated on the shadows between the trees. Mason scanned the undergrowth, but there was nothing obvious. Maybe a deer, maybe an old scent. Still, something about Lucky's behavior stuck with him. The same thing happened again the next day and the day after that. Always at the same spot. Always the same reaction. Finally, Mason mentioned it to Tasha when she came by to drop off paperwork. "He stops in the same place every time?" she asked. Mason nodded. "Won't move until I guide him away. It's like he's trying to tell me something." Tasha glanced down the trail. "Maybe that's where it happened, where the python got him." "I thought the hiker said it was further south," Mason replied. "Yeah, but trauma messes with memory. He could have wandered there after it happened. Or maybe something else happened in that spot." They decided to return the next morning, this time with Tasha bringing her canine unit, a trained search dog named Echo. The three of them walked the same trail, Lucky leading, tail wagging occasionally but slowing down as they neared the curve. Under the trees, right on cue, he stopped, staring again into the dense woods. Echo began sniffing the air, her demeanor shifting into work mode. Tasha unclipped her leash and gave her the command, "Find." The canine darted into the brush. Mason and Tasha followed, Lucky staying close behind but alert. After about 30 yards, Echo stopped suddenly and barked one sharp, loud, insistent. They reached the spot and froze. Half buried beneath some fallen leaves and branches was an old backpack, torn, muddy, and clearly abandoned for weeks. Tasha carefully opened the zipper. Inside was a child's jacket, a broken flashlight, and a faded photo of a dog that looked strikingly like Lucky, but younger. Tasha's breath caught. This wasn't just a dog wandering alone. He was with someone. Mason looked down at Lucky, who was sitting calmly beside the pack, as if waiting for them to discover what he already knew. "What happened out here?" Mason whispered. Lucky didn't move. He just watched, silent, patient, almost like he'd been trying to guide them here all along. The discovery raised more questions than answers, but one thing was certain now. Lucky hadn't just survived the wild, he had a past connected to something deeper, and whatever it was starting to surface. The discovery of the old backpack changed everything. Back at the ranger station, Mason and Tasha laid out the contents on a table. The jacket was small, clearly a child's size. The flashlight had corrosion on the battery case, and the photo, though faded, showed a boy holding a dog that looked almost exactly like Lucky. The resemblance was uncanny. The same black coat, the same eyes butter collar was clearly visible in the photo, one with a silver tag. Tasha stared at the picture. If this is Lucky, he didn't just get lost. He belonged to a kid, and this backpack's been out there for weeks, Mason added. So where's the kid? Dr. Howard joined them, concern written across her face. There's no missing child report connected to a dog in this region recently. But it's possible this never made the news, especially if the person reporting didn't give full details. It happens more than you'd think. Mason looked down at Lucky, who sat quietly by the table, still watching the photo like it was something familiar. We need to figure out where that photo was taken. Tasha grabbed her laptop and began running image searches using facial recognition databases and local missing reports. Hours passed with little to show. The clock ticked toward evening when a result finally pinged back. There, she said, turning the screen toward Mason. That's the boy in the photo. His name is Jace Miller, 7 years old. Went missing with his dog 3 years ago during a camping trip in Big Cypress National Preserve. The search lasted 10 days before it was called off. They never found him. Mason stared at the article. That's more than 50 miles from here. Tasha leaned forward. If this is the same dog, he survived on his own for years. He could have traveled that distance in search of food, or trying to find home. Dr. Howard was already dialing the contact listed in the article. She reached the boy's mother, Dana Miller, who now lived 2 counties over. After a brief conversation, she agreed to drive to the station the next morning to see if it truly was Jace's dog. As the call ended, Mason looked down at Lucky. Is this where you came from? Lucky gave a quiet whine and laid his head on Mason's boot. That night, Mason didn't sleep much. He kept replaying the sequence of events. The python, the way Lucky had reacted in the woods, the silent way he had guided them to that backpack. He hadn't just survived, he had remembered, and he had led them to something important. The next morning, Dana Miller arrived just after sunrise. She stepped out of her car with trembling hands, clutching a newer photo of Jace and his dog. Scout. He was my son's best friend, she said, her voice breaking. Jace never went anywhere without Scout. That was the only thing that kept me from falling apart. That maybe, somehow, they were together. When Mason brought Lucky out into the yard, Dana gasped. She didn't need to say anything. Her body reacted first, hands to her mouth, knees shaking. Tears fell freely as she whispered, Scout. Lucky froze mid-step, ears lifted. He stared at her for a moment, almost analyzing her face, then took a cautious step forward, then another. He sniffed the air. The space between them closed, and finally, in a moment, as quiet as it was powerful, Lucky pressed his head gently against her knee. Dana broke down, sinking to her knees and wrapping her arms around the dog. Scout, you came back. Tasha, watching from the office window, whispered, it's really him. But even as emotion filled the air, Mason noticed something else. Scout. Lucky kept glancing back at him, not with confusion, with something deeper. He stood beside Dana, but his eyes searched for Mason, as if part of him had formed a new loyalty, one that didn't disappear just because the past had returned. And Mason knew that this story wasn't over, because whatever happened to Jace Miller out there, Scout might be the only one left who knew. The reunion between Scout and Dana Miller brought tears to every eye in the ranger station. She sat on the bench outside, arms around the dog who had vanished 3 years ago with her son. But as joyful as it seemed on the surface, there was still a shadow that hovered behind the moment. Jace was still missing. Inside the office, Mason, Tasha, and Dr. Howard reviewed the old case files Dana had brought with her. The details were heartbreaking. Jace and Scout had gone missing during a family camping trip in Big Cypress. One afternoon, Jace wandered off with Scout and never returned. Search teams combed the area for days. Helicopters scanned the woods, and thermal drones flew over the swamps, but there was no trace. What if Scout led us to that backpack because it belonged to Jace? Mason said, his voice low. Tasha nodded. And what if he stayed near that area, hoping someone would come back? Dr. Howard leaned in. But then why did he suddenly move so far from the area and end up entangled with a python? Mason stared at the map laid out across the desk. Unless something happened that made him leave, the backpack The child's jacket, the photo, all of it, pointed to one thing. Scout had stayed near the spot where Jace was last alive, but he'd also been trying to tell someone something. Tasha's voice broke the silence. Let's go back to the spot. There could be more. An hour later, the team returned to the stretch of Everglades trail where the backpack had been found. This time, Dana came with them. Scout, no longer referred to as Lucky, walked calmly by Mason's side, though he kept glancing back to make sure Dana was still close. As they reached the familiar bend in the trail, Scout's ears perked. He stopped again. Mason unclipped the leash. The dog took a few steps toward the trees, stopped, and looked back at them. He wants us to follow, Dana whispered. They moved carefully through the brush, following Scout deeper into the woods. The air grew heavy, quiet, thick with humidity. About 50 yards in, Scout stopped. He sniffed the ground, then began pawing lightly at a cluster of vines near the base of a tree. Mason stepped forward, carefully pulling the vegetation aside. The ground underneath looked disturbed, not fresh, but definitely not untouched. What is it? Tasha asked. Mason didn't speak. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small digging tool. Dana crouched beside him, silent, her face pale. They dug slowly, cautiously, until Mason's blade hit something hard metal. He cleared the dirt gently and unearthed a small metal lunchbox. It was dented and rusted, but still intact. He opened it. Inside were a few old items: a toy compass, a folded paper map with crayon marks, and a tiny notebook with Jace's name written on the front dot. Dana gasped. That's Jace's handwriting. Tasha looked over Mason's shoulder. He must have buried it. Dr. Howard knelt beside them. Scout stayed because he remembered. This spot, this is where it all happened. Mason flipped through the pages of the notebook. Some were damaged, but a few were legible. One entry made them all freeze. Scout and I are staying here tonight. I heard something. It's big. I'm not scared because Scout is with me. If someone finds this, please tell my mum I miss her. The handwriting was shaky, written in large, careful letters. Dana put a hand over her mouth. Tasha looked at the others. He survived for a while, but something scared him. Something big, Mason repeated. A chill settled over them, even in the swamp's heavy heat. As they left the forest that day, the air felt different, heavier, full of unspoken truths. The discovery didn't bring full closure, but it was a start. Scout had stayed near the last place he saw Jace, guarding the memory, guarding what little evidence remained. As they walked back to the vehicles, Scout walked ahead, then stopped beside Mason and looked up at him. That same steady look of trust was there. And Mason knew Scout hadn't just survived the wild. He had carried a secret through it, and now, piece by piece, it was finally coming to light. A week had passed since the discovery in the woods. Though there was still no confirmed trace of Jace Miller himself, the recovered lunchbox and notebook were handed over to authorities for further investigation. It brought a new wave of attention to the cold case, and search efforts in the region quietly restarted. But amid the renewed search, Scout had finally found peace. He was no longer just the lost dog in the swamp. He had a name, a family, and a story that had touched more people than anyone could have imagined. Dana had returned home, her heart torn in two. She had accepted that her son might never return, but Scout's survival gave her something to hold on to. She knew he would always be a living reminder of Jace's courage and his love. But when it came time to decide where Scout should stay, Dana surprised everyone. I think he's already found where he belongs, she said, glancing at Mason. They were standing outside the ranger station. Scout sat between them, tail thumping gently against the wooden floor. You're his home now, Dana added. You saved his life. He's never taken his eyes off you since. Mason hesitated, caught between gratitude and disbelief. Are you sure? She nodded. It's what Jace would have wanted. He always believed Scout was more than a pet. He used to say they were part of each other's soul. And now, I think Scout found that again with you. Mason crouched down, brushing his fingers through the soft fur on Scout's neck. The dog leaned in with quiet certainty, eyes calm and full of understanding. Tasha, watching from the porch, smiled. I don't think Scout would want it any other way. From that day forward, Scout became an honorary member of the Everglades Ranger team. He accompanied Mason on patrols, greeting hikers at the station and lying at Mason's feet during late-night report writing. But what made him truly special wasn't just the loyalty or intelligence, it was the unspoken bond between him and Mason. a connection that couldn't be explained. Only witness. Word of Scout's survival and the mysterious clues about Jace's disappearance spread quickly. Local news stations covered the story, calling it one of the most emotional rescues in recent memory. People from all over sent letters, donations, and support. Some offered help in the renewed search. Others shared similar stories of lost pets and resilience, but Scout didn't seem interested in fame. He preferred the quiet of the woods, the scent of the pine air, and the steady rhythm of Mason's footsteps. He remained alert during every walk, pausing sometimes at familiar spots in the trees as if still remembering, still holding on to the past. Then one morning, Mason and Scout returned to the old trail where they had first found the backpack. It was part of their new routine. Mason walked the same path with Scout every few days, not out of hope, but respect for Jace, for what they had uncovered, and for the memories Scout refused to let fade. That morning, Scout stopped beneath the same cypress tree, looked up at Mason, and then sat down, pressing gently against his side. No whining, no alertness, just peace. As the sun filtered through the trees, Mason sat beside him, resting a hand on his back. "You found what you were looking for, didn't you?" he said quietly. Scout closed his eyes, leaning in just a little closer. That moment wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't bring the closure of a recovered child or a full explanation of everything that had happened, but it brought something equally powerful: acceptance, healing, and a bond that wouldn't be broken. Because sometimes the strongest stories aren't the ones that end perfectly, they're the ones that survive. And in the quiet heart of the Everglades, a ranger and a dog walked forward side by side into the next chapter of a story neither of them could have written alone.